everybody. Welcome to Beyond HR. Today, Jeff and I are starting a new podcast conversation. Jeff, why don't we start with you giving a little bit backstory around why we started Beyond HR and what are we planning to cover here?
Yeah, cool. Absolutely. This, I promise, is not just yet another podcast. Head to your list of 15 podcasts you try to listen to every week. And it's certainly in my head and in the minds of many, many others with the advent of generative AI hitting, 2.5 years ago now. It is different, massively different in that this is different than a lot of the things that happened in the Industrial Revolution, including electricity. That stuff was amazing, but it was very slow in coming. This is a very different level of technology because it's basically addressing our intellectual capacities. And it's helping us think and rethink things that we possibly never could possibly do before. In HR, it's super powerful and super important because we sit on a gold mine of incredible data, all about the most opaque element of our balance sheet, yet the most expensive, the most risky, the most vulnerable, which is human beings. This is going to take us to a whole new level. So I have been out there, right, kind of just consuming loads of information and trying to plug into as many incredible people as I possibly can. I came across Shveta's the podcast Hides.
I think it was about a couple of months ago that you and I were both sharing tons of information that was coming our ways with respect to AI and AI transformation and how AI is changing the nature of work. And because both of us have lived the world and life of HR in variety of organizational contexts, we wanted to clear in our perspective on how we see these things impacting the traditional HR function. And that's when our paths crossed online on LinkedIn and we said, why don't we connect and talk to each other? And 2 months we've been ideating, we've been talking to each other. And then we thought that, why don't we share this perspective with a wider audience? And that's what we are here to do today. We jammed last week and we said, hey, why don't we call this conversation Beyond HR? Because the way HR of the future is going to be shaped and reshaped and evolved is going to look and feel very different from what it is today.
Indeed.
So
Very
Beyond
different.
HR is less prescriptive because
Yep.
the change that we are going through is unprecedented. There's no playbook and there's no end state defined for this change yet. So instead of being prescriptive about what needs to be done, let's explore perspectives. And through this exploration, we might learn. And through our learning, we might be able to share aha moments for others to explore as well.
Indeed. Absolutely. Yeah. And look, we all need them. And that's why very much I felt no weird kind of competitive sense of anything, nor do I with anybody in this field. It feels like there is just such a small population of those of us who are kind of like deep diving into these things, reading these incredible studies and experiences and everything else. And it's like this flood of information, not enough people to consume it. So it felt very, very natural. And frankly, I love it. It felt wonderful being able to reach out to other experts and say, hey, how would you like to chat? How'd you like to collaborate, on various things? So it's a wild and wonderful time. It's a bit daunting. It's a bit overwhelming, but I think that's what you and I want to solve for, Shveta, is this issue of, look, let's stop talking at the 30,000 foot level. Let's start really diving into the weeds and helping people really kind of understand what actually is this stuff? What's really going to happen? And how do I basically approach it? How do I engage with it? How do I potentially transform what it is we do with it? So I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
It totally will be. So what we will in our conversations try to explore are certain areas of HR which will be disrupted and try and imagine what a future state of that particular process, that particular functional area in HR could look like given what's happening in the business broadly. And so let's kick off our first episode. You made a really good suggestion, Jeff, last week that our first episode should be anchor episode so that we can frame the conversation around why should HR care? AI is happening, but what's in it for HR and why should they pay attention to this? From our lens, we see a tsunami brewing, and the nature of tsunami is that it doesn't hit you till it really hits you. So let's frame the problem, Jeff. What's the imagination gap here?
Well, it's interesting. You used a very interesting analogy, which is a tsunami. When it's funny when you look back on people's experience with what we call over here in England, the Boxing Day tsunami that occurred many, many years ago. It started in Indonesia and just spread around the world. What was fascinating about it was that people could see that the tide was being ripped out I mean, and going back what seemed to be like at least a mile, you would have thought that that would in and of itself register all sorts of like panic and basically force people to say, wow, run, this is a tsunami, get out of here while we still have time. There were still people on the beach, right? You know, when those waves started to kind of like roll in. And it was like this sense of, and we all have it, it's all very instinctual, this sense of wonder, this sense of like, is what I'm seeing true and real? You know, is this thing going to actually, they don't even think about like it doing, you know, injury or damage to them, but like it's just fascinating to kind of be there and explore it at that close a level. And so that's kind of the weird experience that we're all having with AI, right? Some of the folks have done a dive straight into it and are getting deeply involved in it and building agents and doing all sorts of things. And we'll get to that in a minute. But this imagination gap is a tough one because it's like, it's wonderful. It's interesting to kind of see the giant wave coming at you. It's very different to see how you can potentially take advantage of that wave versus, you know, simply trying desperately to survive it. And so the imagination gap is the thing we have to solve for, I think, because people are like, wow, cool, fanciful, incredible technology. I may have even played with it myself, come up with goofy plays, you know, written an ebook, I don't know, just done fanciful things. But to take that technology and then apply it into a work environment, my work environment in particular with the HR context, where I've got multiple different, I mean, many dozens of employee lifecycle, you know, kind of things that repeat themselves, dozens of HR lifecycle issues. How do I take a tool like this and basically somehow or other take the pain away from the stuff I don't love doing that I think is low value, but is really manually very constricting? And how basically can I apply this new technology to basically take care of those things? And it's like, I don't even know where to begin. You know, I'm no technician. That's why I'm in HR. I kind of have some sense of this computer stuff and software and so forth. But now I'm hearing all sorts of horrible things like, gosh, you got to watch out for AI. It's very dangerous. Bad things can happen, you know, so I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think. So I'm just going to hold firm and I'm just going to kind of watch and see what happens as I stand here on the beach.
And it's an interesting one because if we look at AI, like if we sit in HR and look at AI, we can look at it from two perspectives. One, AI has really good potential of making what I do in HR today much better. It takes away the constraints that I had in let's call it pre-Gen AI era, which I was struggling to get ahead of as an HR professional. Either I didn't have resources or tools, or my hands were tied to be more efficient and optimize my capability for us to free us our time up to be more strategic partners to the rest of the business. So that's one way to look at AI, that yes, it makes me more efficient. It frees up my time. The challenge with that thinking, though, from my opinion, Jeff, is that the nature of work and how businesses operate is changing at the same time. If you want to be more efficient in a pre-Gen AI process, the question is, as the business changes and flips and how we do work and how we operate on the business side is changing, is that process still relevant in the future state of work? So we have to not
Yeah.
only think about optimizing our current state, but also redesigning our current capability as HR function to match where the business is going. That's why it's an unprecedented situation that we are encountering as HR professionals.
Man, you're spot on. And that's exactly it. And that's what I kind of realized. I was super excited about the technology. Oh my God, I love a good shiny object. And I love a thing that feels like I'm talking to Spock, but, you know, oh my God, it's finally here. You know, I can talk to this thing. This thing is going to get to know me. Like it's going to get smarter and smarter. And I just read everything there was to read about it. Having said that, it was this notion of like, okay, this is kind of interesting, but where do we go from here? And how is it we're basically going to plug it in? And this imagination gap issue was caused by the fact that what I was missing in terms of understanding was this is not technology you just plug and play and it just instantaneously kind of makes life better. You literally have to make a bed for it. You have to prepare your entire environment basically for it to come in and kind of take things over and do those wonderful things that you've been dying for it to do. And that means you're absolutely right. It's job redesign, it's work redesign and or re-engineering, whatever term you want to use, and it's organizational redesign. It literally will have that level of impact and it's next world stuff, right? And that's the hard part about it is that we're being asked in a way to kind of forget not entirely, but I mean, at least forget the way we always ever used to do stuff and just remember the purpose for doing the stuff that we did do
Mhm.
and think actually and imagine what if we could do it 10x, 100x better?
Yeah.
What would that look like? And literally just kind of plan it out, just kind of like have a go with it and just take a shot at it because AI can ingest all of that and start to make sense of it for you, no matter the level of complexity. In fact, the more complex, the better. You know what I mean? And so that's, I think, the exciting part about this. But this is not just, and we're going to make this point over and over again, this is not just a fancy new technology. This is a wholesale, deep change across every aspect of our organizations, the way we do things and everything else. It's also a wholesale, deep change in terms of our own mindsets
Mhm.
and the things, the biases that we carry, the cognitive load and history that always ever seems to follow us. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And all these kind of like interesting interplays psychologically in our heads are all kind of holding us back from really kind of doing a huge deep dive into this. That and the fact that technology is still relatively new. It's only 2.5 years old, and in some cases it's not necessarily ready for prime time, and it needs experts basically to help you think through how do you create and bed down the preparatory elements so that you can then bring AI in after you then have said, well, this is what we want to do in terms of the things we want to accomplish over and over and over again with great consistency, accuracy, and quality. So how is it then we apply this new technology to that challenge?
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, it's more complicated than you originally thought. You know what I mean? It seemed
It,
really cool.
yeah, totally is. And I think this is where we have to start with some imaginary North Star.
Yeah,
Like we need
sure.
to have some picture of future state because nobody's going to give us that future state. Only then can we start applying transformation efforts because we
Yeah,
know there's a destination, there's point B that we are going towards that, and keep an open mind that that point B might not be point B. Midway, we might have to take
correct.
a pivot or a detour because
Yeah,
right now we are navigating completely uncharted waters. Even the business doesn't know where they're going to net out and end up in 5 years from now, right? So
correct.
the speed, the scope, the size of this change is, again, I will say unprecedented. So in order to have a North Star, I think we can start our conversation today with Burson's framework on superworkers. Because at the end of the day, no matter what change the business goes through, it impacts people.
Yeah.
So we as people in work context will have to operate differently. We might have a different work context. We might have a different definition of even things like hybrid. Hybrid might not be remote or in person. Hybrid might be how do we play
Human
better
versus
with
AI.
machines? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
maybe we start there. That might be a good anchor for us to have the framing of our first episode.
Yeah, no, without question. And for those of you who aren't quite sure what we're talking about, first of all, Josh Burson is probably one of the most credible and capable and deep thinking kind of HR analysts in the space. And he's done lots and lots and lots of thinking. Used to work for Deloitte as a partner and kind of like built out their entire kind of people practice and used to publish this amazing report every year about the future of work and predictions for the following year and everything else. And he since basically has now gone off and kind of created his own consultancy and has his own kind of educational academy, which I highly recommend. And I get nothing for saying that. But, I think the thinking that he and his team go into in terms of preparing our physical, psychological, and technical environments to kind of really take massive advantage of these types of new technologies coming along, I think is amazing. And he wrote an article called The Rise of the Superworker, which I'm sure we will add to the comments here in terms of this. And what was interesting is he always ever kind of talks about sort of evolutionary states of things. And he himself also kind of like dives into as a number of other academic institutes like MIT Sloan and Harvard Business Review and all sorts of different folks have done, and in terms of redesigning work and reengineering work. And he makes a distinction between the two, saying that, look, you can get some, like 15 to 30% improvement by, having some more efficiency basically brought to your job. But that's not really kind of enough for it. You can possibly gain an additional, gain a total of 50% improvement through the augmentation, similar to what you were just talking about, this notion of hybrid. So I'm a smart, capable HR person, but I want to be augmented and supported by a tool I can reach over to at any time and have that tool basically give me instantaneous answers, whether it's anything about our policies or anything about theories of leadership and people management. Access to all sorts of really interesting, juicy kind of program data and everything else. That's certainly very, very helpful and makes me feel actually a good deal smarter and a little less freaked out about having to come up with that stuff all on my own. But then you get into like re-engineering work as opposed to simply redesigning work. And now you're talking about, 100 to 200% improvement, which is basically in a way potentially replacing wholesale, kind of workflows that, you take an example like recruitment, basically this notion of, let me help you, the AI saying to you or offering, I can help you write that job description. I can ask you a bunch of questions, you and the hiring manager. What is this role all about? What do you expect? What does great look like? What do you expect of this person to be able to perform and so on and so forth? And I'll put together an incredible job description. And if you want to, you can program the agent to say, great, go launch this across however many job boards and LinkedIn or whatever the case. And then I want you, AI, to actually engage with people. And as they're kind of like sending information in, respond immediately back to them, let them know what the process looks like, let them know how quickly we'll get back to them. And you monitor all that and make sure that people are well communicated to and handle that. For those people that we select, and this is a human involvement, for those people you have shared with us and said, wow, these are the closest matches to the job description, you basically then say, great, AI, can you do me a favor and go and do some screening calls with them and come up with the most interesting and sort of differentiating questions that you think will actually really separate those who are close to the mark versus those who are farther away from the mark. And then you can basically shortlist for us and then send us the 5 most reputable folks or most well-aligned folks, and then set that whole thing up and then have auto scheduling and everything else to kind of then introduce somebody to the talent acquisition professional, the hiring manager, and whoever else is on the interview team. AI could do a lot of that heavy lifting, but you need probably to have humans in the loop as well to kind of help judge that process and just make sure that it is accurate. And we'll get into the role of the human in this space. But then, at some point, and this is definitely futuristic, and Josh, bless him, is a super smart guy, but he's always like 1 to 2 years ahead of himself. But it's great because it kind of helps like lift the veil on the art of the possible.
Yeah.
He argues that then the ultimate thing that we can look at is something like 300% improvement in terms of return on investment with full autonomy, where basically any manager of any department is overseeing a web of agents that are all cleverly strung together, connecting to each other, managing multiple workflows, but you're actually giving them autonomy to learn how to continuously maximize the outputs of those workflows. We are not there yet, right? There may be some aspects of business, possibly in supply chain, manufacturing, a couple of other bits where you can probably introduce that level of autonomy. For the rest of the businesses, at the moment, we are not to the point where we can probably bring as many as 8, 10, 12 different agents that are all supervised by an overlord, an agent boss, right? And then you, as a human being, basically would keep an eye on their behavior and how all that works.
I like when you say we're
No,
not
we're not
there
there.
yet, Jeff, because I would like us to paint a picture of that one, the end state of this change is not defined yet. So we don't know where the ball will land, but we know where the ball is going. So, and the concept of Superworker really helps anchor the conversation around if this is the direction that we are going in. Superworker is a great interim state for this transformation. If we look at this transformation in stages, it's a really great interim state because it helps us frame the conversation around how do we keep humans? What's the new value of humans in this new way
Indeed.
of work that we are designing versus should humans be there or not? We know for foreseeable future there will be a need for humans, but how humans play in this mix is going to look and feel very different. And this is where the concept of Superworker is really amazing because if we look at AI, we've been on this journey of automation for decades now. It's not something new for us. But with AI in the mix, it can really help us automate much more efficiently with speed and with efficiency and accuracy. So that's really great. That's one flavor of how AI is going to impact us.
Indeed.
But then AI can also be leveraged by humans. If we look at Gen AI, whether it's ChatGPT, Perplexity, Grok, Gemini, the way knowledge workers use Gen AI in day-to-day work is a very simplistic way of closing the imagination gap on how we augment our capabilities.
Yeah.
You write an email, now you tell ChatGPT to write the email for you, and the more you use the Gen AI version of your choice, whether it's GPT, whether it's Gemini. For example, I've been using it for 2 years now, and I don't have to give it the context of my conversation. It knows my style. It knows how I need to respond to emails. So I just tell it and it produces an output. I'm not saying I copy paste that output, but it is 80% close to output that I was looking for. So it really helps reduce the time from an efficiency perspective that I need to spend on doing some basic work. So that's an example of how we are augmenting ourselves. There are so many others that I can give here.
TV shows that are super popular, but there was one in particular called Suits that had to do with these like really highfalutin, mega intelligent lawyers. Love them or hate them. But it was what I loved was the bit where the assistant, I guess the executive admin, came in to one of the head lawyers basically, and he started barking at her about missing something and not doing a thing. And she's like, actually, I'm 5 steps ahead of you. And he's like, he was just gobsmacked. He's like, how? How is it you knew that? And it's like, well, it's not like I sit there and do nothing all day long. I watch and listen to everything. I learn everything and I learn to anticipate and I take action on that basis. That's my job.
Yeah.
And the lawyer was just so blown away and impressed. He was like, whoa, what a godsend.
That's right. He was augmented by that person.
He was totally augmented, indeed. Yeah. But it is that, isn't it? It's that notion that they get to know you over the course of time, your mode of discourse, the things you ask about, the profession you're in, what kinds of things do you want to know more about? And then it's like, it feels like weirdly, it like becomes part of you. It's kind of mind boggling.
Yeah, totally. And then you touched on agents, which is the third flavor of AI, where we will eventually, and we are seeing that happen in certain pockets of the business, where agents, which we can also call autonomous decision-making systems,
Yeah.
will enter our work environment where humans can delegate pieces of work to machines so that they can make decisions and choices. So automation it's still like black and white step list that we give to
Yeah.
machines
It's
and
like
they
it's like a
execute on
workflow
it.
that you
Yeah.
follow. Yeah. Yeah.
They are not making decisions and choices. Whereas in agentic world, we give them a task and they figure out how to get that task accomplished. They make
Yeah.
choices and decisions. So we are delegating decision making to agents. So those are the three flavors that super workers can look at when they're thinking about, or people can look at when they're thinking about, how do I go on this journey of becoming a super worker who is a worker in an organizational environment where they have augmented their capabilities and extended their capabilities using technology, specifically AI. And now they can leverage data better, they can produce insights better, they can make more AI driven recommendations, better decision making, faster work, and create greater impact in the organization. So that's a really easy way to look at how do we go on this journey of becoming a super worker, because the future need of an organization is to have super workers.
Yeah, and these like interesting apps are popping up left, right, and center. The person has one called Galileo that he's been working on. I think he launched it about a year and a half ago or something. Like everything else, it starts off as a chatbot. It's a knowledge repository, and it was trained, I think, on I don't know. He said he had something like 50,000 different articles and elements included in his Person Academy, and so he basically trained it on the corpus of knowledge around that. Anybody employee wise can engage with this tool and say, hey, Galileo, tell me how much time do I have left? By the way, my wife is going to go on maternity leave in 3 months. What is our family leave or paternity policy over here? How does that work? What does that entitle me to? How do I get paid? All without talking to an HR person. And you're getting super accurate data back. That wasn't good enough. Evolution number 4 was actually we need to give this machine autonomy. We need to basically give it the power to go into systems for people to say, tell you what, yes, I found this information out and shared it with you. Would you like me to execute on this for you as well? And I'll just take care of it. And basically, I'll learn over the course of time how to do this better and better for you, because it can be hyper personalized, to your situation, but basically also for the rest of the population as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's come kind of full circle. But that's just the beginning. That is literally just the beginning of what AI can do for this. It literally can just now. I mean, we'll get into it. I don't want to spoil all the fun, but yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it totally is. So now that we know that the future is of super workers, I wonder, and let's visualize, what does an organization look like when all the people in the organization are super workers who are able to use the machines in a fashion that's most efficient and adds most value to the organizational landscape? I don't think it would be a traditional organizational hierarchy the way we know it.
No, it starts, I mean, this is my speculation. And to a degree, like this notion of creating skills based organizations, right? Where we start to focus on people's skills, not their experience, what companies they work for, how long they work there for, what educations they had, and everything else. Where's the proof, right? Where's the proof in terms of what you know how to go do? And to what extent do you know how to go do that? And how do we assess it? Importantly, how do we assess it for every kind of role? Because we still kind of need role types, at least in the organization, so that we know how to deploy the right talent, the right skills to solve the right problems. Right? This goes all the way back to that Good to Great book by Jim Collins. It's, the right people on the right bus and the right seats, kind of notion. Well, this is finally solving for that, right? And so that threatened, in a way, not threatened. It kind of posited, maybe we don't have our organization set up properly. We have them set up in silos, and we have them set up like, top to bottom. And we have, it's very old school. It's very 1930s and 40s and 50s in terms of our thinking. That's not really the way things are going now. And now with the advent of AI, to basically help us supercharge that whole process of understanding what are the skills and proficiencies that need to actually be accomplished here based on the work that we do on a regular basis. How many of those individuals we have based on how many hours we anticipate basically this all taking. Crunch that down and then figuring out, okay, now how do we actually assess each and every individual relative to these models so that we have a really clear mix and match kind of thing. That's a very fluid, very liquid organization, right? Where talent is kind of flowing slipstream wise and so forth. So really, what do we need? We need basically people of some level of seniority looking out for people underneath them to kind of make sure that they're on path, that they're directed, that they feel supported, that they feel properly paid, all those kinds of things, right? But it's almost like, in a way, melting down the traditional hierarchies. But then what do we replace it with? And how do we basically take full advantage using tools like AI to engage with that environment, make amazing sense of it, and give us loads of insight in terms of what potentially we could go do with it, how to plan for it, how to drive it. Where are these people? Where do we not have these skills and people, and all those kinds of things? And actually help us start to think through managing this complexity at speed and basically hoping to kind of like beat out our competition. But you're absolutely right. Wow, this is going to be well different than like we've ever had before.
Yeah, totally. And I love how you've kind of painted the picture of the future state of an organization is going to be a dynamic organization.
Yeah.
Where there's talent mobility, there's fluidity in how people are assigned to work or how humans and machines collaborate together to get an outcome achieved in the work context. Boy, that puts a lot of pressure on how HR is structured today and what
Yeah, if
value
HR was
HR brings.
wondering, if
What
HR was
value?
wondering, is AI going to replace me? It's like, nope. And you're going to have a very different job to do. You're going to have actually many different jobs to do. So
That's
you have,
right.
you have work.
The value of HR changes completely.
Huge.
If we look at the genesis of HR, from what I understand, this capability existed in organization. If it's fair to say, not for the people to start with, at least, but more to protect the organization.
Yes, correct.
So that's the genesis of HR. And pre-Gen AI era, HR has been trying to kind of get out of HR police perception to, we are the culture ambassadors. We take care of the people. We're here for the people. We make, like world-class, best-in-class employee experiences so that there's the best productivity and most engagement in organizations. We were already on that journey. And then comes AI. And suddenly we are like, okay, now we don't have to look at one, we don't have our hands tied. We have tons of flexibility and freedom to do things differently. But at the same time, the organization is changing and shifting quite rapidly. If I'm a decision maker in HR, I'll be thinking, should I be optimizing for current state, or should I be recalibrating the efforts of HR for a future state, which means getting together and defining what is the value my HR team brings to the organization? So it's more like a conversation around what's the value of HR versus let's optimize a performance management system or a succession management system or employee engagement system in silos. I don't think that might be the best approach for HR organization given the pressures from the business that we are facing, especially the dynamic organization picture that you painted, means this is the time for us to kind of let go of the old thinking of how we've done work before and
Mhm.
redesign an HR department that aligns with the journey that we were already on to be that people and culture organization
Totally.
for the
Totally
rest of
agree.
the business.
Well, you know what? You said something really interesting just then, which is a couple of things, in fact. By the way, you always ever say interesting stuff, but one in particular was this notion of we take a look at sort of the disparate things that we kind of like help the organization solve for today. And you mentioned like performance as one of those things, right? And then you said basically, do we, in other words, do we kind of take those things on one at a time, maybe, and kind of just go fix that thing or apply AI to that process and see what we can actually, kind of improve and just kind of like scientifically drive it forward. We'll create a baseline and we'll measure throughout the process and we'll keep tabs on things and we'll employ external experts or whatever the case, engage very carefully and slowly with them so that we don't blow everything up all at the same time and then completely lose touch of the complexity of it all. Let's just take one process. But then you actually said something really interesting too, which is we're going to have to forget the way that we used to do it, right? And performance is a really interesting one. What I've always ever imagined ought to be the case, because I was, as you were, always the bearer of the soul destroying horror, which was the annual performance review. And it
Mhm.
was down to us basically to create the process, to launch a tool, to help people basically pick times whereby they're meant to write up the reviews, then actually share the reviews out, and then basically, meet, maybe, I don't know, there's all these like crazy, horrible processes that people had to kind of go through. And nobody was happy with it.
That's a great example. I think we should do a full episode on reimagining what the performance management system
Yeah,
would and should look like as the
indeed.
nature of work changes and how people work in organizational context, because there's a lot of pieces that we can start experimenting with and exploring in
Yes,
today's state as well. Like the AI can really be a very powerful tool to for organizations to experiment with to augment the current performance experience for employees as well. And
indeed.
that speaks to the fact that we don't have to, as we go on this journey of AI transformation within HR, we don't have to feel overwhelmed by the technology aspect of it.
Mm,
I think one brilliant thing about AI, or Gen AI, I should say, is that when Sam Altman released ChatGPT, it was released in a chat interface. No better way to get adoption at
right.
scale
I
across
know
the
it's
globe
beautiful.
with
Yeah,
with such an easy to use tool. Like it closed the imagination gap for everybody on what's the potential of AI.
yeah,
Now the power is in our hands to see, oh, this is what it can do today. Now let's imagine if we kind of, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Like if we put these pieces together, what it can do. We don't have to be experts at LLMs. We don't have to be experts at understanding the history of AI and the difference between
no,
machine learning and large language model versus, other nuances around AI. That's when we need to partner with our IT experts, have a very strong collaboration there. But I think where we as HR folks need to spend our time is in concepts and visions of the future state experiences that we want to build. The technical aspects, we have people who can help us nail
yeah,
that
correct.
down. But how do we go to an IT department if we don't know what are the requirements that we are going to have? Because we can't
Right.
expect IT to create a world class performance experience for us. That is for us as
No,
HR
right.
people in partnership with the business leaders to design what experience would work best for both all the stakeholders involved, which means employees, which means their managers, which means the organizational leadership and HR. And then
Totally.
invite IT to bring it to life. We don't have to be programmers. That's not what we are aiming for.
No, and that's the best part of this whole revolution is it basically said you don't need to be programmers. You don't need to know code, right? You basically can type it using natural language. Now, in various formats, of course, you get a much better result, and they're very simple formats to follow. But that's about all you need to know. That, and you need to have an imagination as to what would be so cool if we could only do this, right?
Yeah,
And then you basically work it out. Work it out on AI, and it
yeah,
will help you get there very, very quickly. So
that's right.
no, that's very cool.
And you've had such rich experience in HR technology and implementations from your work experience. Jeff, I'd like to, as the last segment of our conversation today, I would love for us to do a little bit deeper dive based on our lived experiences,
Mhm.
because I've also lived in the technology space, so I can speak to that. But let's talk about what are the common mistakes to avoid from past transformations for HR people who might not have had the opportunity to be part of transformation efforts. Like when Oracle is implemented in an organization, HR might not be the change team. Typically, the change team sits within IT,
Mhm.
so they might not have a up close and personal experience or what worked, what didn't work. So maybe we can spend like 5 minutes talking about what didn't work in past transformation efforts.
Well, there's plenty. This could be a separate segment all to itself. And I think at some point we probably should do a segment, Shweta,
Yeah.
whereby what we talk about is how to set the right conditions, basically, and basically also to kind of measure. I don't know what you want to call it, the pulse, the
Yeah.
aura, right? The psychological sense of things amongst people before we actually enter into any kind of wholesale change, even a partial change, because it's very interesting. A lot of work is being done on this right now, and what they're uncovering is that there is, in fact, a lot of trepidation, a lot of worry, a lot of concern, and it's not needless and it's not overstating things, because if you basically were to completely automate or hand over huge chunks of work that isn't properly kind of vetted and reinvented and everything else to a tool that is just going to take that information and run with it, maybe even throw parts out of it and decide, I'm going to come up with some better parts. This is rubbish and it doesn't work. Yeah, you can set yourself up for a bit of a disaster if you're not careful. So what you want to do is focus on things that are going to kind of like hit in the green zone, right? Things that are basically where people are desperate to for manual work, somebody else to go do it because we hate this stuff. And there is plenty of that in HR. Oh my
Yeah.
God, right? There are spreadsheets and there are all sorts of manual processes. Basically, if you think of the classic pyramid, right? The bottom two layers are just pure administration, compliance, governance, and policy enforcement and creation and all these kinds of bits. And frankly, you're not going to get much by way of resistance in terms of doing all that, other than people just want it done well and they want it done right. So let's just make sure that we're careful in terms of how it is we do that. Where I have seen things fall down is people get excited about the tech and the tool and the shiny object. And they're like, whoa, we got to go do something with this. And they basically throw that at a whole bunch of problems. And then oddly enough, the adoption isn't there. It doesn't work properly. We haven't really thought through what the issues, the problems, the first principles, problem, the root
Mhm.
cause issues, really simple concepts. We just completely forgot. And we
Yeah.
just threw a bunch of technology on top of it. So that's usually when it falls down. Also, when you don't get stakeholders, rather, and I hate that term stakeholders. It just sounds like we're talking about autonomous bots in a way. People basically whose lives will be affected by this thing, right? And we need basically to understand how they feel about it right up front. And importantly, make them part of the design process to make the whole thing better so that they feel part of the re-engineering or the reinvention and
Yeah.
the innovation. And basically they can start the whole process of imagining, gosh, you know what? We've always ever done this way. I hate this. It drives me nuts. And the more I think about it, I'm now angry about it. I would rather it do this, 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 and this instead of this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
And can we please? And like, yeah, that's the whole joy of this thing. But HR should potentially be thinking of itself as a facilitation, kind of body that really kind of helps the translation between work issues, workflow issues, bottlenecks, problems,
Yeah.
flows, all these kinds of things, and say, let's get the right people in the room, regardless of what departments they are. So it's always ever cross functional because people are always ever affected across multiple barriers. And let's get them to talk openly about, well, what is this thing that we're trying to accomplish? What do we hate about what we do today? What would be amazing in terms of a thing we could do tomorrow? And let's get involved in kind of shaping that together. So
Yeah.
I think and look, we have to get good at that. All that sounded so easy. It is not easy. People are married to these things, right? This
Yeah.
is the way they've always ever done it.
Yeah.
And we are not, you HR people are not going to come in here and tell me that this is a better way to do it, right?
Yeah, even within HR, we might hear the same
Of course.
sentiment. In fact, if we look at the Burson's report that we were talking about,
Yep.
he calls out some really neat stats. I think from what I remember, one of them was that 45% of change efforts of the past have failed,
Totally.
which is not new news. Many organizations even talk about 70% change efforts failing in the past. But
Totally.
what I really liked him calling out in that report is that 72% of those that failed was because of the human resistance.
Totally. Absolutely.
And so, like, one of the lessons that we can learn this time around is uh, that start with the people first. To your point,
Yeah.
let's understand how this change is impacting different players in the mix. And I would also add that we should bring in the people early on in the change process.
Absolutely.
Like, the perception around change management is that let's make all the choices and decisions, and then once we are ready to roll it out, then we'll bring the change team, which includes learning team as well, to
Right.
communicate and to train. I'm like, that's too late in the game. If we bring the
Totally.
right players in decision making up early, then they're already bought into the change. So the amount of effort that we will have to put towards communication, building awareness, readiness, training, all of that will shrink considerably because you already have majority of your people bought in. And try
Yeah.
practices like having a change network, identify people who are early adopters, and you leverage them as the voices to have a grassroots momentum around adoption. So I would definitely emphasize on having a more people-centered design for your change effort.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? It's really interesting. Even though this is kind of a book about a very famous book about how to bring applications and software tools and SaaS products and things like that to life. It's called Crossing the Chasm.
Mhm.
And basically it's a great kind of depiction. To your point, you talked about early adopters, and early innovators, and there's always ever those wonderful people, but they're a very small percentage. And the trick is, how do you get those people who are super excited and evangelistic about what it is you're trying to do to basically help you evangelize and champion the power of this change to multiple different types of people who have different perspectives and agendas in this whole process, right? Some people are worried about how it's going to make them look. Some people feel like, oh, this is a process I invented many, many years ago. I'm now going to give that up. What does that mean for me? There's all the kind of big issues related to people feeling like this is going to replace them, for sure. We can talk about that later as well.
Yep.
So it's really critically important that you always ever focus on, number one, what problem are you solving for? Number two, who from a human being perspective is involved in this? And then three, how do we get everybody together around the same issues and start to solve it together so we feel like we are in this together and we're going to make this better together and that we're all going to, kind of reap the benefits of it together. So
I
you're
think
absolutely right.
I think that's a great wrap up to our conversation today with the points that you highlighted, because you and I can keep talking about this, which we will in
Which
the
we
next
will.
episode. But for today, let's wrap it up here. And I will add to your key points that HR teams who are listening to this can start imagining one team or one process in HR function. Forget the rest of the org. In HR function that can become super worker ready. What would you need to get that function super worker ready, and what would change in HR to support that team? That's where your story begins.
Indeed. Yeah, great chat. Really, thank you very much for that, Shweta.
No, thank you, Jeff. And I think our next episode is going to talk about our favorite topic, performance, and how to reimagine
Yes.
performance.
Yep. Got some really cool stuff for that. And I can't wait to kind of deep dive into it.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and let us know what you would like to hear Jeff and I jam on. Until next time.